The sun hit the chrome like a slap, hard and bright, as the silver Bentley slid into the gravel lot and made the whole place look smaller. Dust lifted in a slow halo. Heat rose off the hood in shimmering waves. Samuel wiped his palms on a rag and stepped forward with that steady walk of a man who has nothing to prove and everything to protect. Sweat clung to his brow, not from fear, but from work. The sign above the bay door creaked in the light wind. Paint chipped. Letters tired. It didn't matter. Engines still trusted him. People did too, when they weren't busy pretending they didn't need men like him. The rich man climbed out with the door still bouncing. Preston Hale. Money wrapped in silk and marble, and the sweet smell of cologne that tried too hard. The suit was cut too sharp for this neighborhood. The diamond watch flashed noon like a warning. He didn't look at the shop, or at the photos on the wall, or the thank you cards from families who'd made it home because Samuel had listened carefully to a sound no one else heard. He didn't look at Samuel either. He tossed the keys on the counter like dropping a bone for a dog. "Fix it fast," he said, already half-turned, voice smooth as glass and just as cold. "And don't overcharge me." Samuel nodded once. No flinch, no bow. Just that calm he wore like a second skin. "I'll do it right," he said. The words were simple. The promise was not. He slid into the driver's seat and listened, really listened, the way a surgeon listens to a heart he might lose. The engine coughed. Something in the timing dragged like a tired leg. He cut the ignition and laid the keys on the dash for a second while his hands traced the memory of similar jobs. Bentleys had tempers when neglected. He'd seen it before. He pushed the car into the bay with slow, practiced effort. The floor squealed, dust sighed. Preston stood in the doorway, one shoe just inside, one shoe out, as if the room might stain him. He checked his watch even when there was nothing to check. "I've got a meeting," he said, as if the clock could hear him and be impressed. Samuel only said, "I'll call you when it's done." He pulled the hood latch and leaned into heat. Metal has its own language. Screws speak, belts confess. Even oil tells on whoever last put their hands where they didn't belong. Samuel listened with all five senses. He didn't rush. He never rushed. He drained the fluids and lined his tools like a choir. Wrench. Socket. Torque. Clean cloth folded twice. He loosened bolts with a patience that felt like prayer. The radio in the corner muttered a baseball game. A boy on a bicycle slowed to watch from the curb. The day slid along the concrete in a bright strip that crept from door to drain. Preston paced 3 times and then retreated to his car's shadow, phone pressed to his ear, voice climbing ladders and throwing down orders. "No, I won't accept a delay," he said. And then to someone else, "Charge whatever you need. We can write it off." His eyes found Samuel sometimes the way a hawk watches a field, hungry, distant, sure the world belongs to the sky. Hours passed. Bolts came out like teeth. Belts sighed in relief. Samuel's hands moved with that quiet rhythm you don't learn from books. You learn it by being the last hope for a stranded mother at midnight. You learn it by keeping your own car alive long after the bank said it should be dead. He cleaned each part and inspected each edge. He replaced what was lying and tightened what was lazy. He checked the wiring harness and frowned at a section that had been rubbed thin where a clip had broken. He wrapped and secured it because corners are where fires start. He double-checked every torque spec, not because a manual told him to, but because he could sleep better knowing he had. He wiped the edge of the valve cover with a fingertip and made sure the gasket seated clean. He refilled the oil and watched the line climb like dawn in glass. Preston drifted back as the hood came down. He clapped once, a single, cheap sound. Finally, Samuel opened the door, turned the key, and the engine answered like a choir that had found its note. Smooth, even, alive. It wasn't bragging. It didn't need to. Samuel listened with his head tilted, eyes half closed, the way a father listens for the soft breathing of a sleeping child. Then he killed the engine and wrote out the invoice at the counter, each line neat, each number honest, parts at cost, labor fair, time true. He slid the paper across. Preston didn't take it. He clicked his pen twice like a trigger. "Let me see what kind of story you've written," he said, and read with the same disdain he used for stop signs. The laugh came sudden, big, performative, the kind of laugh that wants an audience and finds one in its own echo. "You think your greasy hands are worth this?" He sneered, looking up for the first time like he just remembered there was a person attached to those hands. That's adorable. He tore the invoice in half, then quarters, then let the pieces fall like confetti at the wrong parade. Samuel didn't move. The boy on the bike looked away. The radio clicked to static. The smell of hot metal drifted up like a question. Preston leaned in close enough for cologne to burn the back of the throat. "You're lucky," he said, each word polished like a coin, "that I let you touch my car." He snatched the keys and turned before the sentence finished landing, already bored with the hurt he'd made. Samuel watched him walk out with the kind of stillness that holds a room together when it wants to crack. He bent, picked up the paper pieces, and placed them in the small trash can under the counter as if they were worth something anyway. Then he looked at his hands. Scar at the knuckle from a long-ago alternator, burn on the wrist where a radiator cap had lied. Lines of oil and fingerprints that would not scrub out even on Sundays. Hands that had bought school supplies, covered rent, fixed church vans for free, and said yes to strangers at midnight because yes felt better than sleep. Preston slid behind the wheel without a thank you and turned the key. The Bentley purred like a cat that only loves itself. He smirked and rolled the window down halfway. "Next time," he said, the words bored and sharp, "I'll take it to someone who knows what they're doing." Samuel's eyebrows rose just a breath, an almost smile that wasn't one. He rested his palms flat on the counter. "You'll pay one way or another," he said softly. No threat, no heat. Just a fact set gently on the table between them, the way you set a glass of water before a man who doesn't know he's thirsty. Preston barked a laugh again and let the car creep forward, then punched the gravel as if speed could grind the moment into dust. The taillights blinked twice at the stop sign, then vanished into the ribbon of afternoon. The shop returned to the small sounds it trusted: fly buzzing at the window, socket clinking into the drawer, the old clock above the pegboard, breathing its steady second hand. Samuel stood there for a long beat, listening to what silence says after pride has left the room. He turned the sign to closed, even though he could have squeezed another job from the daylight. He walked the length of the bay and touched each tool in its place like telling a child goodnight. He opened the little fridge and took a bottle of water and drank it in 3 slow swallows, feeling it settle into the heat inside him. On the wall by the light switch, a Polaroid of his father watched the room. Grease on both their faces. Samuel was 14 in that picture, trying not to smile. He looked at it now and let himself have the smile his younger self had held back. "Still here," he said under his breath. He thought about the laugh, the torn paper, the key toss thrown like a stone. He thought about how some men live in houses so big they never hear the sound their own words make. He thought about the wire he had wrapped, the clip he had replaced, the line of oil right at the notch. He breathed in, breathed out, light low, sky turning that tired blue that means supper somewhere. Out by the curb, the boy on the bike circled once and lifted a hand without stopping. Samuel lifted a hand back. He swept the floor slow and careful, as if collecting the day itself into a neat pile he could leave behind. The gravel outside crunched under a delivery truck and then went quiet. He killed the radio and the fluorescent hum took one last breath and died. He locked the door and stood in the lot a moment longer, letting the evening sit on his shoulders like a weight he'd chosen. Somewhere far off, a train pulled its long sorrow across the horizon. He slid the keys into his pocket and stared down the road where the silver car had gone. The air felt thick, like heat before rain. His words still floated there, not angry, not loud, just true. "You'll pay one way or another." He walked home, boots slow, spine straight. The kind of straight that rises from roots and not from pride. Porch lights blinked on like stars that knew his name. A dog barked once, and then remembered him and wagged instead. He climbed his steps and paused with his hand on the knob. He pictured Preston's face when the engine had turned over, that flash of satisfaction that didn't belong to him. He pictured the long driveway of a house that drinks its lawn, the weight of a diamond on a man who has never lifted anything he couldn't drop. He pictured dawn. He pictured the way truth shows up without asking permission. He went inside, and the door closed with a soft click of a man who had already decided what he would and would not carry into tomorrow. "You have not enough humanizer words left. Upgrade your surfer plan." The shop sounded like loneliness and light, just the soft hum of old fluorescents and the thin tap of rain finding a rhythm on the tin roof. Samuel sat on a dented metal stool in the center bay, elbows on his knees, big hands hanging open like he had laid his heart in them and didn't know what to do next. He replayed it without trying the rip of the bill, the bright, cruel laugh. The way Preston Hale's eyes slid over him like he was something the mop forgot. It was not a new story. It was the same story in a sharper suit. Still, it pressed. It pressed in the chest where pride lives. In the throat where words want to climb but know there's no use. He held his breath until the sting burned off and let the air out slow. He looked at those hands scar on the knuckle from a stubborn alternator that fought back. A pale crescent on the wrist where a radiator cap hissed and lied. The blackness in the lines that would not scrub out, no matter how hard Sunday tried. Hands that had lifted crying babies out of overheated back seats and waved worried mothers back onto the road when the light on the dash stopped shouting. Hands that took cash and thank yous, and sometimes nothing at all, because nothing at all was what a man had that day. He flexed his fingers once. The ache didn't leave, but it listened. Across town, the world glittered, as if money could buy better weather. In a dining room, tall as a lie, under chandeliers that fell like ice, Preston Hale held court with a napkin on his lap and triumph on his tongue. "You wouldn't believe it," he said. And the table leaned in the way people do when they like someone more than they should. "The guy tried to overcharge me," he went on, shaping the story to fit the shape of his pride. "I taught him a lesson." Laughter rose like champagne foam, easy, empty, spilling over. Crystal kissed crystal. Someone clapped the table. Pride echoed louder than truth, because pride is always wired for sound. Preston basked in it, warm and sure, the way a man basks in a mirror and calls it sunlight. A pale pianist touched the keys and poured sugar over the noise. Waiters floated like swans. The whole room pretended it was built on good taste and not on the backs of people who never got a chair. Back at the garage, Samuel stood. He did not curse, he did not throw. He moved with a patience that fixes what other men break. He rolled his stool to the pegboard and hooked each wrench where its shadow had been waiting. He wiped the sockets clean and nested them like small moons. He ran a cloth across the bench with slow circles that looked like prayer. A spider web in the corner caught a bead of water and made it a jewel. He smiled at that without meaning to. "People show who they are when they think you can't fight back," he said, not angry, not sad, just true. He clicked the radio off and listened to the hum turn to quiet. It was a good quiet, the kind that doesn't make you lonely, just makes you honest. He flipped the switch by the door and the fluorescents sighed themselves dark, one after another, like a choir bowing out. The lock turned in his hand with a respectable thunk. Outside, the smell of hot rubber and rain mixed in the air, and the street lamp out front blinked its tired eye and held. He walked home slow, shoulders square, cap pulled low against the drizzle. The town at night is honest in ways daylight can't stand. The grocery sign buzzed a lonely G. The laundromat hummed its last spin. A bus slipped by with nobody on it but a driver and a tired song. Samuel's boots found the same cracks they always found. The rain came steady, like a metronome set to patience. Drops pooled on his jacket and rolled off the edge like small decisions. He saw himself in the glass of a darkened storefront broad, steady, older than yesterday and still here. He passed the diner where the night cook nodded once and slid a napkin-wrapped piece of pie into a bag without words. He passed the church, where a single candle kept trying. He passed the empty lot where boys used to play until their shouts broke and their bones learned weather. At the crosswalk he waited for a car that didn't need him to wait, and he waited anyway, because the habit of care doesn't check the price tag. Across town, the rain slicked the cobblestones that rich men like because poor men laid them. The restaurant's valet whisked umbrellas open and shut like tricks. Preston told the story again, and it got bigger, as lies do when you feed them sugar. He did not notice the way the new kid at the station stared too long at his diamond watch as if it were a lighthouse or a warning. He did not notice the busboy rubbing his shoulder where a tray had bitten and staring out at the rain like it might teach him something. He did not notice the piano player's eyes skip to the clock, to the door, to the rain, to the door again. The check came heavy with flattery. He signed with a flourish that said, "See, I belong here." The pen knew better and dried a little on the way. Samuel reached his porch and paused with the key in the lock. The house was quiet. He could already feel the cool of the dark room like a hand on a fevered brow. He stepped in and stood a minute in the doorway, letting the rain talk to the roof. On a shelf by the window a photo watched him, his wife years younger, his daughter small enough to ride a forearm. He touched the frame with 2 fingers and the ache in his chest shifted from sharp to deep. He set the bag on the counter, unwrapped the pie, cut it in half, and ate his part standing up, fork small, bite slow. He left the other half covered in plastic wrap and slid a note beneath it. For morning. He ran water in the sink and washed the fork and left it in the rack because some order makes a man feel bigger than what tried to make him small. He turned off the kitchen light and the house held him like it always did, without questions, without conditions. Out past the river, beyond the low places where the fog gathers like old stories, the driveway to Preston's home curled up a hill and spilled into a circle of stone, no shoe ever scuffed by accident. The Bentley sat there under a portico built to keep rain from touching anything that didn't want to remember the sky. Water traced new paths across waxed paint and found the seam where the hood closed. It slid down and gathered at the lowest point and dropped, patient, exact. The rain kissed the earth and the earth took it, no tip required. Inside the car, under layered polish, beneath the brag of chrome, along the belly of wires that carry spark and tell time, a place rubbed thin by years of looking the other way waited with its own kind of memory. It was small. It was honest. It was the quiet truth that lives in what is neglected. It did not wish harm. Truth never does. It simply sits with what is real until the moment comes when real can no longer be ignored. Inside his big, echoing house, Preston poured something expensive over ice and watched it disappear down the glass as if that were talent. He kicked his shoes off and left them where they landed. He peeled the watch from his wrist and set it on a table like a crown you take off because your head hurts. He thumbed through channels and couldn't find himself in anything. He checked his phone and found the same applause repeated until even praise sounded like static. He thought about the car purring under his hands when he turned the key, the power answering quick, obedient, sure. A man could love a machine for making him feel godlike. He smiled and made a note to schedule the detailer. He did not make a note to apologize. He stretched on a leather couch that had never known a nap earned by hard work and closed his eyes. The rain kept count against the window. Back on the other side of town, Samuel brushed his teeth and looked himself in the mirror like you look at a friend who told the truth and paid for it. He pressed his palm flat to the glass and felt the cool come through. Still here, he said to the reflection. He turned off the light and the mirror gave him back to the dark. In bed, the sheet pulled to his chest. He listened to the roof talk to the rain talked to the street talked to the river carry it all toward morning. Sleep came in layers, not soft, not cruel, just necessary. He sank into it with the same trust he gave to bolts torqued right and wires secured in place. He did not dream of the laugh. He dreamed of a road that did not end where a man said it should. In the driveway, the Bentley's metal cooled. Moisture breathed in and out of places men don't think about when they think about power. Somewhere along the harness, deep under the hood where pride never puts its hands, a thin skin of insulation held out against time and friction and the arrogance of what was left, good enough. Water does not argue. It finds, it learns, it waits. The rain kept falling steady, cleansing, foreshadowing, and the car gleamed as if beauty could bless neglect. The house slept, the town slept, the clock over Samuel's workbench ticked softly in an empty garage. And in a place small enough to miss and important enough to matter, something hidden finished its count and prepared to speak the only language consequences ever use. Morning came soft, pale, and almost kind. The kind of morning that makes you think the world has forgiven you for whatever happened yesterday. The air was still, the trees barely moved. A thin mist sat over the lawns like a prayer, no one knew how to say out loud. Then the calm tore open. A sound split the air and bit the sky. It wasn't thunder, it was closer. Meaner. A deep belly sound that rolled down the hill and slammed into every window at once. People looked up from coffee cups. Dogs went silent, birds scattered like paper. And at the top of the circle drive, where wealth likes to sit and shine, the Bentley bloomed into a flower of fire. Orange, white, black. A roar. Heat rising fast enough to bend the morning. The silver frame twisted like it wanted to scream but only metal came out. Tires burst like small grenades, glass coughed out in bright pieces and rained down on the stones that had never known heat like that. Neighbors came running in sleep shirts and suit jackets, holding phones high as if a screen could bless the moment. Someone shouted to call the fire department. Someone else whispered a prayer they hadn't used since they were a child. A woman clutched her robe tight and said, "Oh my God," and then said it again because sometimes you need to hear your own voice to believe your own eyes. Smoke climbed the sky in a thick column, and the wind caught it and carried the story toward town before the sirens even woke up. And in the middle of the front steps, just past the heavy door that keeps weather and truth out, stood Preston Hale. He did not move, he did not blink. His perfect image cracked down the center like glass that has met a stone, his mouth opened. Nothing came. He had keys in one hand and a life in the other, and both felt useless. He had barely made it down the first part of the driveway when the car took itself away from him. One moment power, the next, a lesson. Heat pushed the air toward him like a shove. He stumbled back, one hand up as if money could block fire. The smell hit, then plastic, leather, old oil, pride burning with the rest. The fire truck rounded the bend and screamed for space. The hoses uncoiled like snakes ready to heal. Water hit flame and made a sound like anger calming down. Steam rose, the car shrank. Sirens fell quiet and left only the hiss of a fight losing interest. Police stood where they liked to stand between what happened and the man who needs to be told what it means. Clipboards appeared. Cameras clicked. Faulty wiring, someone said. Authoritative, but already bored. Negligent maintenance, another voice added, eager to close a file that wasn't even open yet. Words traveled fast. They always do. By the time the last flame gave up, the news had chosen its angle. Luxury gone up in smoke, silver turns to ash, pretty lines, easy lines. Lines that don't cut if you don't look too hard. But Preston Hale looked hard. He had no choice. He heard a softer voice in the middle of all that noise. A voice from another room, from another kind of light, Samuel's voice, even and low. You'll pay one way or another. The sentence played over in his head like a song you didn't ask to love. He tried to push it away, and it came back stronger, the way truth does when it wants to be heard. He rubbed his hands together like he could warm them on a fire he couldn't control and felt the sting under his palms. Shame leaves heat behind. He watched the last fit of flame chew the license frame and spit it out. He watched the emblem drop and roll, and lie there like any piece of metal. The firefighters gave a few slow nods, the way men nod when they've seen enough mornings begin this way. One of them slapped him on the shoulder, not cruel, just human. Lucky it happened before you were on the road, he said. Preston tried to nod back and found his head heavy. By noon, the driveway was a scene that wanted to forget itself. The car sat black and small, the kind of ruin rich men are not used to seeing belong to them. Yellow tape fluttered, the smell hung around like a witness. The neighbors retreated into gossip and doors. A reporter left a card that said, "Call me if you want the country to know your side." Preston went inside his house and found the walls taller than they had been. He tried to pour a drink, and his hand shook enough to add a second shot. He tried to call someone who would laugh about it with him, and every name on his phone looked like a mirror he didn't want to check. He tried to sit and could not. Sitting is for men who can meet themselves. He stood there with the glass in his fingers and thought about a torn invoice, a look that didn't beg, a voice that didn't rise. He thought about how he had said, "Fix it fast," and never said, "Thank you." He thought about wires and warnings and the part of a man that likes to skip the steps that don't flatter him. The drink stayed untouched. He put it down and left it there like a promise he couldn't keep. The road to the edge of town had never looked so long. He drove a borrowed SUV too fast around turns he used to take without seeing. He kept glancing at the passenger seat like he expected a voice to tell him what to do. Nothing spoke. The garage sat where it always sat, small, stubborn, open to whoever needed it. The sign over the bay door creaked the same song. The air smelled like oil and rain and something older than both. Samuel stood near the workbench, wiping down a wrench with a patience that made time behave. He didn't look surprised. He didn't look smug. He looked like a man finishing a job before he started another. "You think this is funny?" The words flew out of Preston before the door even stopped swinging. They didn't hit anything, and they didn't sound like he wanted them to. He needed them to be strong. They sounded thin. "You destroyed my car," he barked, loud enough to wake a dog 2 doors down. He planted his feet the way men do when they think volume makes a case. Samuel looked up slowly, like the sea looks up when the wind starts to push. Calm, deep. A kind of quiet that doesn't back up when noise arrives. He laid the clean wrench on the bench and turned fully, not giving the moment more than it deserved, not giving it less. He studied the man in front of him with eyes that had seen 100 versions of this scene and still believed in better endings. He didn't move closer. He didn't step back. He let the space be honest. "No," he said. "Just that at first." The words sat between them and set the table for the next thing. "Your disrespect did." He didn't add heat. He didn't add explanation. He didn't list the rules of physics or pride. He let the truth be as simple as it had to be. The words went through the room and found the right places to stand. They echoed enough to make both men hear them twice. Preston opened his mouth to argue, but the argument didn't show up. What showed up instead was the picture of his own hand tearing paper that wasn't his to tear. What showed up was a memory of keys thrown like crumbs. Of a laugh that had needed witnesses because it couldn't stand alone. He tried to glare and found his face tired. He tried to hold his chin up and found it heavy. He looked at the floor and saw the oil stains that made their own maps, lines from 1,000 jobs done right when no one was filming. He swallowed the shout he had brought, and it burned on the way down. The silence grew, not awkward, not empty, just full of everything neither of them needed to say. A fan ticked in the corner. A drip from somewhere found a pan and made a metronome for truth. Out on the road, a truck rolled by and the sound slid through the open bay like a reminder that life doesn't pause for men who find out what they look like. Samuel's hands were still now. Big, steady hands. Preston's hands were not. He clenched them once like he might want to fight. The feeling passed as fast as it came, because you can't throw a punch at a sentence that doesn't move. He forced another try. "Everyone's saying it was wiring," he muttered, grasping for a rope and a well. "Negligent maintenance. That's what they said." He stood up straighter, hoping the words sounded like a shield. They sounded like paper in the rain. Samuel nodded once, not agreeing, not disagreeing, just acknowledging that a mouth had made sound. "Wiring tells the truth about the last hands that cared," he said. "So does the bill." He reached for the rag again and folded it in half, then half again, neat as a promise. "I fixed what I could see. I priced what was fair. You taught the rest how to speak." Preston felt something move in his chest that wasn't anger. It was smaller, it was truer. It was the feeling you get when a mirror you've been avoiding catches you anyway. He wanted to run, he wanted to rewind. He wanted to be the kind of man who had not made this day necessary. He looked up at Samuel and found no victory there, only a steady kind of weather. It made him feel small and safe at the same time. Outside, the rain started again, soft enough to hear it, steady enough to matter. It stitched the dust back down and cooled the air that pride had heated. A boy on a bicycle rolled past and peered in, and for a second the whole scene was framed by a moving circle of childhood. Then the boy was gone, and it was just two men in a room that fixes what breaks. Preston rubbed his palm across his face and left a clean streak through a day that had smudged him. He began, and the word caught like a shirt on a nail. He tried again, and the second try hung there, trembling. He didn't know how to finish because he had never practiced that sentence. The silence held him up anyway. Samuel didn't save him from it. He let it work. Some truths need time more than answers. The clock over the pegboard clicked to the next minute. Somewhere far away, a siren wailed and turned toward someone else's trouble. In the shop, the air felt honest. Preston lifted his eyes and met the gaze of the man he had tried to make small and found he couldn't do it anymore. Not here. Not after heat and water and the kind of mourning that takes something from you to give you back your name. He shut his mouth and lowered his head an inch. It wasn't much. It was the beginning of a door opening. And in that thick, clean, quiet one man burned by humiliation, the other steady in truth. The day decided what kind of afternoon it wanted to be. By midweek, the town was telling the story like it had been waiting for it. How the morning screamed, how the silver car folded, how the rich man with the perfect shoes finally stood in a puddle of his own reflection and didn't like what he saw. It moved from barber chairs to bus stops, from church steps to checkout lines. People lowered their voices when they said his name, like shame could hear. They raised their voices when they said Samuel's, like dignity deserved echo. Insurance men in pale shirts walked the driveway with clipboards and practiced sympathy. They crouched, pointed, photographed. Then they left with sentences that sounded like math but felt like judgment. Faulty wiring, they said. A spark from neglect. The kind of problem that hides under shine. And under all that clean language sat a simple truth. Samuel had tried to fix what pride would not let him finish. Justice had arrived without a fist. It came in a quiet, exact voice that said, "This is what you chose." No one cheered. The sky didn't open. The grass didn't bow, but people looked at each other in the soft way that means we see the same thing and we won't pretend not to. Preston Hale started avoiding the places that had once loved him. The table at the restaurant stayed empty even when they saved it. The golf course asked after him and then learned not to. The valet boy stopped practicing the story of the diamond watch because the watch didn't tip like it used to. The mirror in Preston's bathroom gave him a man who had learned to look down while shaving. He kept his phone face down more often. Messages went unread. Invitations were answered with maybes that meant no. The laugh he used to warm rooms sounded brittle in his own kitchen. Pride is loud when it performs. It has no voice when it has to listen. He walked past his garage and flinched at the smell of ash that hid in corners and waited for his breath. The burned chassis sat there under a tarp, smaller than memory, proof that something other than him could win. Samuel's garage, meanwhile, learned a new kind of busy. Not chaos, not fever, just steady gratitude. Cars lined the curb like penitent animals. A nurse came in after a double shift and fell asleep in the chair while he changed her brakes and left a note that said, "Pay when you can." A teacher brought homemade cookies and asked if he could listen to the rattle that only came when the rain did. He found it. He always found it. A father with 2 car seats and not enough cash came in late, embarrassed. Samuel wiped his hands and waved the bill away until next month. People started saying things like, "He fixes more than engines and he puts families back on the road." A woman at the counter told her friend, "He fixes what pride breaks," and the word stuck to the air like a blessing. Reporters came once, curious but careful. Samuel kept his answers short. He didn't tell them the story like a victory song. He told it like a weather report. A man refused to pay. A warning went unheard. A spark told the truth. He didn't say Preston's name because names are heavy and he wasn't trying to hurt his own hands with them. He went back to work as if glory were a mask that didn't fit right. He stayed late to sweep, not because a camera might catch him, but because the floor remembers kindness. In little ways, the town learned to stand differently. The barista, who used to correct you when you said the wrong size, learned to listen before speaking. The foreman who never looked at the janitor started holding doors with a simple nod, no sermon attached. Even the boys on the corner lowered their voices when an old man passed, not because anyone told them to, but because they had watched a roof glow orange and had seen what it looks like when the world decides to make a point. There was a hush in people's courtesy that hadn't been there before. The kind that comes when a story finally points its finger and says, "This is what matters." One evening, when the sun leaned red against the far houses and made every dent in the fenders look like a map of where someone had been, a man walked up the lot in clothes that didn't know how to brag. No suit, no shine. His shoulders had learned a new angle that week. Preston stopped at the threshold like a church had surprised him. Samuel looked up from a carburetor and waited. He didn't reach for a smile. He didn't reach for a scowl. He gave the man the dignity of choosing his own beginning. Preston took a breath that sounded like gravel and held out an envelope with both hands. Not tossed, not slid, offered. It looked heavy for paper. "I was wrong," he said, not loud, not practiced. Soft, the way a man speaks when he finally finds a word that fits. Samuel didn't take the envelope right away. He studied the face that had once worn a smirk like a birthmark. It wasn't there now. There was a crease between the eyes that hadn't been carved by laughter. There was a gentleness in the mouth that only humiliation teaches. Samuel nodded once and reached out. The envelope was more than the original bill, double. It sat in his palm like a rock pulled from a river, worn, honest, offered with both apology and relief. He set it on the workbench without counting. Numbers weren't the point. "It's not about money," he said, the words simple and precise, each one finding the place it was meant to stand. "It's about respect." The sentence hung in the bay like a clean flag. Preston's eyes watered in the way eyes do when they've been holding back a storm for too long. He wiped at them with the heel of his hand and gave a small laugh that belonged in a different man's mouth. "I don't know how to fix that," he confessed, looking past Samuel to the wrenches and the pegs and the clock that had never lied to anyone. "You start by naming it," Samuel said. "Then you keep your word." He didn't offer a lecture. He didn't offer a hug. He offered the work. That's what real men offer when they mean it. They stood like that for a moment. 2 men at the hinge of a story, neither trying to slam the door. Outside, The street carried kids on bicycles and a mother with a stroller and a city bus with 3 people and a driver who sang to himself at red lights. The smell of cut grass wandered through. A dog barked once, and then decided it wasn't necessary. The world did what it does when truth has been spoken. It kept moving, but softer. Preston put his hands in his pockets, found nothing there worth touching, and took them out again. "Thank you," he said. It wasn't for the car, there was no car to thank him for. It was for the way Samuel had held his ground without swinging, for the way a man can refuse to bow and still refuse to break another. Samuel dipped his chin. "Drive safe," he said, and the words held a new kind of weight in a room that knew what happens when people don't. As Preston turned to go, the sun sagged lower and spilled a warm orange across the concrete. It climbed the wall and touched the shelf where Samuel kept a photo of his father. It threw a glow across the hood of a sedan waiting for a second chance. It lit the rag in Samuel's hand and made the grease look like gold for a second, like proof that work can shine without asking permission. Samuel stepped outside and watched the day close itself with care. The sky looked like fire, but not the kind that eats. The kind that cleans, the kind that holds you in its light and says, "This is the edge of the day, be honest here." He wiped his hands and let the rag fall over his shoulder, a small flag of a hard job done right. Preston crossed the lot without hurrying and did not look back until he reached the curb. When he did, he found Samuel in the doorway, framed by tools and truth, and he lifted a hand, not high, not showy. Samuel lifted his, in return. It was enough. The town would keep telling the story, the way towns do when they find a tale that teaches without wagging its finger. They would tell it to kids who wanted everything fast. They would tell it to men who thought money could excuse tone. They would tell it to themselves on days when they felt small and wanted to be loud. They would remember a car that exploded and a man who didn't. They would remember that justice didn't need sirens to speak. It needed patience. It needed a mirror. It needed a mechanic who kept his voice low and his work high. And if you stood in that doorway long enough to hear the last lines, the moral was easy to catch and hard to forget. True power isn't in wealth or titles or the glitter of anything that burns quick. It lives in dignity, the kind that doesn't explode in anger, the kind that stands and tells the truth, and waits, steady as a heartbeat, until the world finally feels the heat of its own choices and learns how to walk in the light.